Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Schmoozin with Forouzan podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Forouzan. This is episode number 7. Of course, I'm very excited for this one. We have Miss Sunita Popal on. She works for the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, in particular, the Victim Impact Program. I really wanted to have her on because she's delving and dealing with some tough issues that come up in the news, issues that pull at the heartstrings. And I thought it would be nice to have this conversation in a long format podcast. It should be very insightful. There's a lot of discussion about law enforcement today, and I thought it would be good to have a conversation about what it's like day to day. What is the district attorney's office doing day to day in terms of their prosecution, in terms of the litigation? So good afternoon, Sunita. Thank you for joining us here today.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
My privilege. Let's just start with the basics. How did you get involved with the district attorney's office?
So I've been working with the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office for 5 years now, but I've been involved in prosecution since 2012.
Oh.
When I was in law school, this is my 5th or 6th DA's office that I've either worked with as an intern, as a post-bar, or as an attorney. And so I've been involved in prosecution for, I want to say, almost a decade now. And it's just always been something I've taken an interest in. I used to watch Law and Order growing up on Friday nights with Mariska Hargitay. And I knew I wanted to be a lawyer since the 8th grade. It was just a matter of what kind of law I wanted to do. And once I realized do public service, this was it.
Since the 8th grade?
Yes. Yes, it was Mrs. Hoffaker's class at Foothill Middle School in Walnut Creek. And I remember we studied government, and I thought it was so neat, the idea of dealing with the Constitution and rights and all of that. And so I knew from then on I wanted to work with law in some capacity.
What was I doing in the 8th grade? I don't think I was making career decisions at that point, let alone
it just kind of stuck.
But you know what? That's so lovely to hear. I like that you had a vision. Even in 8th grade, you had a vision and you went for it. Like, God bless you. I appreciate that. I think that's pretty cool. In terms of so you just wanted to be in the DA. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You are where
later that happened. Yes, absolutely. I think I was in college when I realized that you could, under political science, obviously is law and public society and how people deal with one another. And that was one of the areas that I took an interest in. So that, I want to say, started when I was in college.
Okay, awesome. Well, let me ask you a little bit about more of the day-to-day stuff. You work in the Victim Impact Program, and I went online and I got a little snippet, a blurb about what the program does. I'd like to read it here. The program is designed to specifically address the uniquely vulnerable. These crimes include those committed against the elderly, children, hate crimes, crimes of sexual abuse, stalking, and domestic violence. So clearly only the light stuff, right? Is that what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Is this something that you wanted to do, or were you assigned? Did you fall into this program?
My cover letter from 2015 to the LA County DA's office says, I can't wait to work on sexual abuse cases. Okay. It says that. So one of the ways that you get into this sort of a unit, a specialized unit within our office, is to express some interest in it, to try to do your best day to day before you're in the unit so they can begin to trust you with the more serious cases. And then again, just show an interest. And when an opportunity comes up, they'll let you know, and then you accept at that time.
That is very interesting. And I'm not going to lie. Part of me feels a warm feeling in my heart that there is actually a portion of our law enforcement services dedicated to this type of stuff. Just in my work, I doubt it compares to the gravity of what you're dealing with, but I do see elder abuse, child abuse, sexual assault, rape, etc. These things do come up in my work, and I occasionally see the impact that has on people. So sincerely, I'm appreciative that there are people out there specifically working on those types of crimes. But let's do this for the listeners. Let's pull back the curtain a little bit. I mean, it's one thing to say, hey, I work for the district attorney's office and I do these particular things. What's the day-to-day like in your office for you?
So The main task, in my opinion, my experience of some unit like mine is that we do vertical prosecution. So we're
Mm,
able to see the case from its inception at its filing stage all the way to sentencing and after sentencing. So what that means for the layperson is a police report comes in, lands on any one of our desks, or it's assigned to us, and then we take a look at it, we review it. As you know, as an attorney, we match the facts of the case to the law that we have. And so we determine whether or not there's any law that's been violated. And then at that point, we determine whether there's any other instances surrounding the case, circumstances around the case, and whether it's appropriate for filing. Because sometimes you'll have a law technically violated,
mm.
but you'll still have issues with the case. And so you have to also consider those when you're filing. We do have a beyond a reasonable doubt standard. As you know, that's the highest in the courts across the nation. And so we have to make sure that we can prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt at the outset, essentially. And then we end up filing it. So on a day to day, you'll see cases come in from detectives, different units across the county. There's 32, I believe, DA's offices across the county.
Wow.
As you know, we serve so many millions of people. We deal with multiple agencies. So anyone from the Los Angeles Police Department to the Sheriff's Department to the individual cities. So the city of Glendale, for example, has its own police department, Long Beach, Pasadena. So they'll bring in the case, we'll review it. At that point, we'll make our determination and then we move forward. We'll go forward with arraignment, setting bail. Is bail appropriate? And then we move forward with preliminary hearing
Mm.
situation with the case, and then pre-trial after the hearing if we do it. And then we may move on to trial, we may not, we may have an offer that's accepted. And at some point, sentencing, and then some level of supervision on some of the cases that come back for progress report after a defendant has pled or been found guilty.
Wow, that's a great summary. It kind of takes my job away from me for asking the questions. You kind of got the whole thing in there, but I do have actually some follow-ups. So let me just see if I understand this. The police file some kind of a report. The report then comes to your desk. Is that how this works? Okay,
Yes, any one of our desks.
understood. And so if one comes to your desk, it sounds like there's some considerations. You said, technical violations of the law, but you also have other things that you're considering. I don't want to get into any confidential stuff, but could you just generally tell me, like, what are the initial considerations that you're making when a police report comes in?
Yes, I mean, you look at the conduct surrounding the case prior and past. So, for example, you'll have a situation where the law was violated on, let's say, January 1st, 2020, but it doesn't land on our desk until January 1st, 2021. So, naturally, we're going to wonder, why is this late? Was it reported late? Was the officer still doing investigation? What were they investigating? What did they find out? Were there more victims? Were there witnesses? Is there corroborating evidence? Right. So sometimes you'll have a situation where an incident will happen. Someone reports on it right away, but then we still have to consider whether or not it is possible for us to go forward because we believe it's so strong, the evidence that we have, that even without corroboration, we might be able to move forward.
Hmm.
But normally we're looking for corroboration. We're looking for something more than just I said something happened and hey, that's what happened. We have to delve in a little bit deeper. I think it's our responsibility to make sure that on every case, we don't just become assumptive, right? We can't just say, oh, okay, well, we're automatically going to take everything for face value. We do have to delve into it. Other considerations can be the status of the person who's claimed to have committed the crime, right? What was their situation at the time?
Hmm.
As you know, in law, there's multiple levels of a killing. So it's not just that it's always premeditated. Sometimes there will be a reason, right? There's a law violated and then there's a death. Or is there some sort of circumstance that arose that person to commit that act? So you have to look at so many different things for both the defendant or, suspect at that point, the alleged victim, as well as corroborating evidence that surrounds it.
As you were saying all this, what came to my mind in particular, I was like, I wonder how much of a role does age come to play in these types of things? whether it's the age of the perpetrator, maybe I should say the alleged perpetrator, or the age of the victim. Is that something you take into consideration?
That's a tough one. I would like to think not. I don't think we consider demographics. I don't consider whether it was a male or a female even. I don't consider what the age of the person was. I almost think that if the age is older, I'm more applauding the defendant for having not had a record, right? Because we also see the record of the individual. So for example, if I have someone on my desk who's older in front of me and I say, oh, okay, they haven't had a record, then I actually think that's great, right? For them, because they've been able to not get into trouble legally, and they've been able to, control themselves in various situations of life. And so it's an accolade to them to some extent. But, when it comes to demographics of age, gender, race, any sort of preference in their life, some of the just general civil rights demographics that we look at, not only do they not have a place in our making a decision or looking at the case, we don't do that. It would be, in my opinion, improper.
Understood. Okay. And, I don't practice criminal law. I'm a civil attorney. So a lot of this stuff, I just remember from law school, to be honest with you. God bless Lori Levinson. But I'll do my best to keep up with you. So if I ask anything that's obtuse or misses the mark, please just go ahead and correct me. Let me ask you another question. I can only imagine reading some of these reports that come into you. Some of them must pull at the heartstrings. Do you have a way? I mean, can you? I can only imagine that there has to be a level on which you think to yourself, you know what, Sunita, I really am drawn to this case because I feel very sympathetic for this victim, but objectively, I know that I should be working more on this case. Does that ever happen? Does that kind of conflict ever arise for you?
No, and I think that's one thing that is important for people that work with us to know too, is that we take every case seriously that's filed, even at its inception, before it's filed. For the purpose of filing it, we look at it as thoroughly as we can. We consider all the evidence. We try to make sure we contact the victim and have a relationship with them in regards to, hey, even if we don't file it, don't think our relationship is now over. We can still help you with services and et cetera, et cetera. But in regards to after it's filed, there's this, I think, misconception that if a case is more serious, that we're going to, concentrate more on that case. But I don't think that's true. I think for most of us, we try to give as much energy and effort into every case, because we know in every case, it's important to that individual or the community that was harmed. So just because, there hasn't been a death, for example, and there's been a sexual assault, doesn't mean that the sexual assault is going to take a second seat or the back burner to the murder. I mean, this is still really serious content and really damaging content to the victim, possible future victims in the community. So we take every case that's on our desk really seriously, and we do our best on every single one, I would hope.
I feel so ignorant as I'm asking these questions because I'm just stabbing in the dark. And I'm like, you know what, Daniel, they have ethical boundaries that you got. So my question would be for you is, do you have some kind of a training that you go through that reinforces ethics, reinforces these priorities before you begin prosecuting these cases? Or is it just something you learn on the job?
I want to say it's both. When we, as you know, we all have to go through law school, take the bar exam, and then pass the, MPRE, which has to do with our, rules of conduct and ethics. And then thereafter, I think, any good DA's office or any good agency will train you to some extent, make sure that we know what the parameters of our position is. And then thankfully, we've got supervisors, we've got colleagues that we can speak with about cases to make sure that we're all doing the right thing. And then we also have various agencies we work with. And if it's not those two balances, then it's our victims or witnesses that are keeping us up to task. So I think it's both training on the job, but also with the different agencies, for example, the LADA's office, we have continued legal education that's
Yeah.
offered to us any given year, which is awesome. And those obviously also have to meet ethics. And then we deal with different things like implicit bias, again, ethics, competency in regards to specific things in the law. Because as you know, Daniel, things are always changing. And
Mm.
so, when you saw with Prop 47, 57, you see with AB 109, I'm sure that every single time one of those changes happens in the law, that there's been some level of study or training at any given DA's office across the state.
Okay, interesting. So let me ask you this. Case comes in from the police. It's on your desk. You've decided that you're going to run with it. What happens next? Is it an investigatory period? Like in civil, we go from the pleading stage, we file the lawsuit, and then we go into the discovery stage. We serve discovery, we serve subpoenas, we take depositions. What's it like for the DA? How do you guys go about that?
So, in my experience, once I have a case, I will try to reach out to the victims and witnesses to make sure that they know I'm available for them. But I also use it as an opportunity to try to get information in regards to any other past prior conduct that I should be aware about. Sometimes you'll hear of a situation where, a case will come in on specific date, XYZ happened. And then after speaking with them, and kind of building that rapport, you'll realize that it wasn't just on that date, but even preceding that date, there was conduct that may have been inappropriate and unlawful. And those can help us determine what to do moving forward. In regards to looking for any sort of aggravating evidence, I think that's where that comes in. But we also will consider mitigating evidence. So by now, the alleged defendant will have known that there is a crime against him. So Sixth Amendment attaches, Fifth Amendment attaches, of course, at the beginning. And at that point, we're able to speak with their lawyer and they say things like, hey, he has these issues we want you to consider for mitigation.
Mm.
On this night, at that time, this was happening in their life. So we want you to consider that. So we, at that time, after the filing, will actually also look at mitigating evidence to help us determine how to move forward. So it's a little bit of both, but it's certainly not as investigatory as I would think your job is. To some extent, the case is already with us, and it's a bit more passive now, our behavior, than aggressive. We're not like asking, the agency to go out and start like investigating. That's already to some extent happened. It's just a matter of now whether or not there's anything else that we should look for. So sometimes we'll have a case where we'll find out as we file it that there's been prior bad conduct or a conviction or some sort of unlawful behavior in another county. And at that point, now we say, hey, I'm the handling DA on this. I heard that in your jurisdiction, this happened. Can you please send me the reports? Can I see how this behavior is either escalated, de-escalated, and where it will serve us in the future moving forward with the case?
So I'm kind of curious, and I have a feeling other people would be too. When you say mitigating circumstances, generally speaking, what are mitigating circumstances in your day-to-day work?
I think some examples are possibly now what you're seeing is mental health
Mm.
is being, I think, not only recognized more, but also accepted as a mitigating circumstance in our courtrooms. I would like to think this is happening across the state and the nation, that if someone is dealing with a specific mental health disorder, that would be, mitigating in regards to why the person behaved the way that they did. And then, of course, we look at other mitigation like self defense. Your
Mm.
classic mitigation is, hey, he was coming at me, so I had no choice but to behave or act in this way against
Mm.
them. So, of course, we start to look at classic mitigation. And then also now, I think newer forms of mitigation. Was there drug use involved? Is there an addiction issue? You and I have talked personally a little bit about this too. So, how much was the perpetrator also victimized as in his or her own life, right? So, what background do they come from, and may have that led to what they did next, or what they did in the circumstance? So, it could be any one of those things.
It's interesting. And by the way, I understand not everyone who's watching is an attorney, and someone might be watching this and say, "Oh my God, person, XYZ committed ABC crime," and you're looking for mitigating circumstances. That's literally her job, is to weigh the evidence. That's what she's supposed to do. That's what we want them to do. And that's what the law asks them to do. So there's a reason that they're trying to consider everything under the umbrella of the law before making a decision to put someone into jail or whatever it might be. I think that's very interesting. So it sounds like there would be a lot of back and forth once they have an attorney. Are you dealing mostly with private attorneys, or are you dealing more with public attorneys?
So as in public attorneys, you mean the public defender or the
Yes.
alternate public defender? Here in LA County, you have an office for both. And then also private. I would like to think that a lot of the people that we deal with are public, and I think that's because private attorneys can tend to be a little bit costly for people who might be in a situation where they're facing criminal charges.
Mm.
But of course, every now and then, we'll see the likes of criminal defense attorneys walk into our courtrooms. It's definitely not uncommon. I just don't know if it's the majority. So if I had to weigh it, it'd probably be 60-40,
Oh,
a little bit more public, and then you'll see a good amount with private, but again, not in every case. And I think sometimes that has to do with cost, but also understanding that there is the bar panel. And so you'll have a private attorney who is acting on behalf of the state as a public attorney, but they are private. It just so happens that they're ended up being called upon by the court to handle the matter.
that's interesting. I didn't expect it to be 60-40. I actually expected
I
it to
think
be
it
much.
is.
That's interesting. I expected to be much more public than private, but that's almost even. Interesting. So let me ask you this. We know what the victim impact program deals with. We discussed it earlier, the uniquely vulnerable, and we had discussed elderly, children, sexual abuse, stalking, domestic violence. Do you do all of those, or do you specialize in one of those areas?
I think it's all of them in our unit. We end up getting cases assigned to us as our load lightens or heightens. And so at, excuse me, any given time, we're looking at really heavy caseloads. And so it's up to our supervisors and our office as to how they want to assign those. I think sometimes when you end up building a niche in a specific area, then the supervisor will come to you and say, hey, you've done this kind of case before. We have another one. So it just so ends up that you end up becoming maybe more the person who's focused on that kind of a case. But otherwise, I think it's pretty even that we all deal with sexual assault, domestic violence, elder abuse, child abuse.
I can only imagine. Well, before I go there, is there a particular niche that you've developed, a certain area that?
I would like to think not. I'm not going to ask for any specific kind. Although I will say I did a very interesting trial that I just got out of about 2 weeks ago, and it was a sanity restoration case. And I ended up finding out after I did it, I guess while I was doing it, that I was one of very few in my office who's done this sort of a trial. It's a different type of law. It's a different type of burden. Very interesting. And so I guess that now, but this is very new, so let's not tell anyone.
Sanity restoration. Interesting. Okay. I wanted to ask you, with the type of stuff that you're dealing with, sexual abuse, domestic violence, this is heavy stuff. I can only imagine part of the job is the prosecutorial aspect, prosecuting, going after alleged perpetrators, doing your due diligence, etc. Is there another part of it, and I think you alluded to this earlier, which is support for the victims? Because the type of crimes you're dealing with sounds like these people are horribly victimized.
Hmm. Absolutely. I try to build as much rapport as I can with them. I think it's really important for them to know that there's someone listening,
Mm.
um, and that person who's listening is going into the courtroom and representing them, is advocating for them. So we sometimes have work phones, and so I have a work phone that I last I remember, got a text at 10 o'clock on a Friday night, and I
Mm,
answered. It was a victim who had been sexually assaulted, and I thought it was appropriate for me to respond. It was case related, and
mm.
so I do my best to be available to them, because if they're reaching out to me, they may not feel like they have anyone else to reach out to get this information. And if I can be available, then I will be. So there is a line, but sometimes it gets mixed between professional and support person or friend.
You know, one thing I learned about being a lawyer, and they don't teach you this in law school, 50% of my job is litigation. The other 50% of my job is really therapist for my clients. I guess people just like to hear it from the mouth of a lawyer. And I can understand that. We're acquainted with the law, and the law is quite powerful. So hearing someone who understands the law explain things to you could be very helpful. I always find that very interesting. And I'm hearing that same sentiment echoed in what you do, or not even echo, just put out right. Let me ask you, uh, what's this like for you? Because sometimes my job takes a toll on me, the types of victims that I'm seeing, whether it's wrongful death or whether it's sexual harassment. Um, is there a line that you try to maintain? And do you ever feel, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but we're all human. Hearing these sad stories can hurt. Talk to me about what that's like for you.
It can absolutely be overwhelming, and I think it's healthy to acknowledge that.
Mm,
So it's definitely not that, before I walk into a trial on a really serious case, I know what's at stake for the family. I know what's at stake for the victim, whether they be with us or if they're deceased.
mm,
I know what's at stake, and that's a lot of pressure. So that can be very, very overwhelming. And then obviously those are the moments where, you're going into a hearing, you're going into trial, and that's not every day. That's maybe every few months.
mm.
So you do have the ability to separate from that overwhelming feeling. But I will say that on a day to day, it's hard and heavy. And so I like to participate in various things. So, whether it be golfing or
Mm.
going to brunch with my girlfriends or taking pictures or hanging out with my golden doodle, who you may have heard by now. I come home and I cuddle her. And
Oh,
so I think it's okay to acknowledge that those of us who are in law enforcement or in positions, even I'm sure as defense attorneys dealing with some of these cases, they can be very heavy for both
yeah.
sides, and you need to take a break, and you need to be able to find things that take you out of it. Thankfully, my mate is not in law. And so I only talk to him so much about my cases, and then we move on. Right. And so I can't imagine discussing it all day, every day. And so thankfully, I don't have to. And it's just kind of nice to be able to take those mental breaks, because it's not, as you know, Daniel, it's not the kind of job that we can just leave at the lab or leave on an Excel spreadsheet. It's all mental. We bring this home. I mean, when I'm in trial, I'm literally strategizing on a Sunday morning
Mm.
what I'm doing the next day in trial. So it's there, it's with me, it doesn't escape me. So it is very important to take those breaks and really kind of check out when I can.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I woke up just this morning, well before my alarm. And the first thing I was thinking about is, should I hurry up in meeting conferring on this one case? Because are they trying to, pull the
Yeah,
wool out from under my, I understand. And again, dealing with,
constant.
yeah, and dealing with such heavy, heavy circumstances that you're dealing with, I can only imagine. I think golfing sounds fun. How did you get into that?
So I got into it, I want to say 2 years ago, and I just got my golf set earlier this year, and I am planning on hitting another course in the next few weeks. We just did one in Escondido, and it's just nice. You're outside, as you know, I work inside, so you're out, you're breathing some fresh air, and you're just able to be competitive, but also have fun. And as you know, I'm pretty sure most lawyers are competitive. So we always look for that in the activities that we do, but it's enjoyable. So that, amongst other things, like, again, cuddling my dog, help a lot.
I get it. My professor at Marshall School of Business at USC She's like, I teach 3 days a week. I golf the other 2 days a week. And she said, every one of you, the best networking is golfing, because those are the people you want to talk with. And that's the time you want to talk to them. And I always remember her saying, Daniel, you need to learn to golf. Oh, still haven't done that to this day.
Really? Let me know. Although, for me, I don't go out with professionals. I go out with family and friends. And so for me, it's a break. Although I feel like for you, it might be work. You're networking, and
I can sing how terrible I am at it, I'm sure. Let's talk about being outdoors. Let's talk about, the pandemic. How did that affect work for the DA? How did that affect your office?
So I don't know that it affected us as much as it affected the civil practice. So I, as a prosecutor, still went to work almost every day. I think there was a few months where we were able to telework a few days out of the week, but now we are primarily back at the office. We are starting to conduct trials again. Okay. Just last week at my office, we had, I think, 3 or 4 trials that concluded. Mine was one of them. So it's nice to see that cases are picking back up and going to trial. As you know, we had extensions allowed by not only our presiding Judge Taylor, but also Brazil before him. And then obviously our Chief Justice, who was allowing us to not have the same due process limits stand. And there was good cause to continue them, especially trials. However, a lot of people don't think this, but we were still having hearings. And so we were still having live witnesses and victims come in, so we could conduct our preliminary hearings. As you know, that's a probable cause hearing. And so we were doing those throughout the pandemic, as far as I'm concerned, and we didn't stop. So
you couldn't stop, right? Let's explain this to people. Constitutionally, people are owed a right to a speedy trial, as in not, you're supposed to get to the trial quickly. And is it true that some of the alleged perpetrators are actually kept in jail pending their trial, and therefore there's an onus on you to get the process going? Tell us about that.
Yes. So if someone is unable to either pay the bail, or if someone has no bail, as you know, there may be crimes that are so aggravated and egregious that there may be no bail at all. And in those situations, the person is kept in custody because of the safety risk that they cause or have for the community. And so they will be incarcerated pending their trial. This still doesn't mean they're guilty. Let's be clear. They're still innocent until guilty. As far as I'm concerned, based on my experience, they're only in custody because of the risks that they pose to the community, as well as possibly flight risk and some of the other things that we have to consider when having someone be out on their own or be incarcerated. So nevertheless, I would say that those individuals that are in that circumstance, we do have a duty to them, pursuant to the United States Constitution and their due process, to make sure that their case is heard within a timely manner. But furthermore, we have Marsy's rights. And so Marsy's law, Marsy's rights have to do with victims, and victims of specific crimes, all crimes, I'd say, have a right to also have their case heard within a certain amount of time. So you also can't cause a delay on behalf of the defense so that way my victims forget what's happening, right? Or what happened to them. So we can't let a case linger and sit on, let's say for the example, the person's out of custody. At some point, we, as the prosecution, will also push forward for the case to go, because we don't want to lose the evidence, the memory that we have for our victims, for our witnesses in regards to the crime.
Let me ask you, and I don't mean to break into the confidences of the DA, so if it's confidential stuff, we don't have to chat about it, but what is your take on eyewitness testimony, I should say? And here's why I bring it up. In my criminal classes with Professor Levinson, and again, I'm a civil attorney, I'm not a criminal attorney, so correct me if I miss something, but I remember she played this game with us. She showed us a photo for like 10 seconds and said, look at everything that's green in the photo and memorize everything that's green. Then she took the photo off and she said, okay, mention everything that's brown. The idea was, if you're not looking for something, you're not apt to necessarily remember it. You're more likely to remember the things that you're looking for, thereby creating a question of the integrity of eyewitness testimony. What is your take on that?
I think in our cases specifically, you have to remember that not everything is just based on a glance, right? And so we do have several cases, I would say a lot of cases in my unit that have to do with non-stranger assailant abuse perpetrator, right? So you don't necessarily have just this person that you've seen for 10 seconds in your life who has now sexually assaulted you. Domestic violence, as you know, has to do with family violence to some extent. There's been some relationship between the individuals. Same thing with sexual abuse. We see that commonly. Yes, we see stranger sexual abuse, but you also see very commonly interpersonal, the individuals knew each other and the sexual abuse then happened. So as far as I'm concerned, I do think we again consider all of this at the time of filing. We want to make sure that the person has a good, solid memory of what happened, and not only what happened, but who did that to them, or the conduct, and then we move forward. So we're confident, I would say, that when we file a case of the eyewitness testimony that we're going to hear moving forward. What I was alluding to earlier was ensuring that a case doesn't linger 5 years, so that that way any and all memory of it is now, diminished to some extent, so that that way you don't have other memories that have covered it. That happens in everyday life, right? We have so many seconds, so many moments in our life between you and I can talk to you on Monday and still not remember maybe something that we discussed. But I want to say, to the most extent, we do recall that it happened. I was here, and all of that. So I would like to think that when we file our cases, we are confident in the eyewitness testimony that we expect to hear. And then I always have 3 rules when I have people testify. And if you knew any one of my witnesses or victims, they would tell you this. My three rules are to speak out loud, to speak clearly, and that's because we have a court reporter. And my 3rd rule, which is actually the first rule and always the encompassing rule over the other ones, is to always tell the truth. And that's the one thing I always tell my victims and witnesses. I'm like, hey, if you don't recognize the guy I have in custody, totally fine. Tell me that. When I'm up there and I say to you, do you recognize someone in the courtroom? And you're like, oh crap, DA Popal, I don't. You tell me that. And I tell them, I say, I'll deal with it. That's not your problem. That's my problem. And so I make sure that that responsibility for that witness or victim is off of them. It's not on them. So heaven forbid they can't recall an ID. And if that's their truth, that's their truth. I'll deal with it, whether that means a dismissal later or having to bring in some corroborating evidence, because that's also possible, or any other sort of circumstance that would arise from it. But those are my 3 rules. And my biggest one, again, is always to tell the truth. And I tell them to let me deal with it.
Interesting. Okay. So let me ask you this. We had Lori Levinson and Obi Anthony on recently. And one of the things that was brought up was, let's say, overzealous prosecutor. And I understand you work at a prosecutor's office. I don't mean to tread on any territory that I shouldn't. And feel free to answer this question only insofar as you can. But do you ever feel, because with the way you just said things, that sounds great. I appreciate that you're not participating in some game. You're looking to get the honest truth. You're looking for actual justice based on the evidence. I love hearing that. Do you ever get the feeling that there are people in prosecution who are just pushing things forward, maybe a little too aggressively for whatever reason? Or is that just a story that we hear?
I'd like to think personally, no, that I have not met any such prosecutor, nor do I work with any such prosecutor now. And like I said, I've worked at several offices and I haven't seen it anywhere. I can appreciate that it happens because I'm not blind to the news or ignorant. I know that there have been people who've been exonerated and who have had evidence come out later in their favor. But I've personally never seen it. And I think one thing that I would like people to know too, who are listening, and even you, if you don't know this, we don't keep stats. So the other day, when I did my trial, the result that I got, whether it was in my favor or not, it did not matter. That did not matter. And so for me, I never feel a personal interest to gain if I win a case, like, oh, I have to win this or I'm going to lose my job, or I have to win this to make my paycheck. I never feel that way. And so as far as I'm concerned, every office I've worked at or interacted with has not had the focus on the end result, but just more how it's going along the way. So absolutely, my supervisor asks, how's the trial going? What's going on? What's your newest development? My colleagues and I will talk about it. But the end result is always, hey, you did your best. And that's it. And so as far as I'm concerned, any prosecutor that feels that they have something to gain by participating in prosecutorial misconduct, as far as I'm concerned, is embarrassing and needs to get out of the profession, because it causes such a distrust in so many of us that go into work every day to do the right thing, that it's really frankly embarrassing and it's inappropriate. And I'm glad that more and more people are starting to be held accountable for it.
I appreciate you saying that. And I think every person on earth, regardless of where they stand, will appreciate you saying that. I think that's good to hear. Let's, if we were to piggyback just on this topic of false accusations, do you ever feel like you get false accusations? And, is there, and again, I don't want to delve into the confidences of the DA's office, but what do you do in those cases?
I have to speak about this more gingerly, I think. I haven't seen an example of an outright false accusation. I have seen situations where perhaps all of the evidence that we needed to feel confident in a filing was not there. And so then we proceed with not filing the case.
Yeah. And I've seen that on my end. I had a case where it was word v. word, and the district attorney didn't take the case. To be honest, never spoke to the district attorney. The police officer kept a nice big barrier between me, the civil attorney, and the district attorney, so I didn't bother him or her. And I understood. It was a word v. word, and I understand at the end of the day, you guys have to work with the evidence that's in front of you. You've been very generous with your time. I have a couple more questions for you before I let you go. Here's just kind of an open-ended, a broad one. What does no one know about your job?
It's tough, and we mean well. I don't even know if I need to summarize on that. It's a tough job. It's an exciting job. I think that, well, I'd like to say it's more than a job, it's a career. So it's an excellent career. It's really wonderful to be a part of, but it is hard. There's a lot of challenge that comes with it. To some extent, we sacrifice our own trust and ability to live in the community openly because we're in this position. So I sacrifice that every day, and I know that, right? So I'll be walking with my girlfriend and I might feel worried, scared, apprehensive about something. And she's like, what's going on? Let's keep walking. And I'm like, no, I feel danger. That's me having sacrificed my own feeling of peace sometimes, because I see so much unrest, right? I see so much distrust, so much bad. So that's what makes it tough. And what was the other part? I don't even know what else I said, but the point is, it can be really tough.
Let me follow. So, okay. I loved your impression of your friend. Is your concern when you're walking, is it that you've seen so much bad and now you just kind of expect it to happen? Or is it you prosecute certain people and you're worried about them coming after you?
No, I think it's definitely the former, just that you see a lot of bad, and we see relationships that go awry. We see familial relationships that go awry that you would never even think of, that you wouldn't even want to think of, because they would make Thanksgiving dinner very awkward. So it's that part. If and when I have children, I will be a little bit more careful with them going to a sleepover. It's just, I don't know if that's a detriment to me, my child, or the community, but it's most likely what it's going to be. It is what it is. So in that way, I think we sacrifice. I think anyone in this position is sacrificing some level of sense of security, and it can jade us. So I think that can be tough.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you giving that answer. You answered my question. What is it that no one knows about your job? I didn't think how much it might affect you going on a walk. Let me ask you, just, are there amongst victims, are there commonalities that you see, patterns, or just results of the victimization?
Yes, I could point to at least two. So the first being that a majority of the victims that I have interacted with feel a sense of trauma from what has happened to them. But it's not just trauma to the victim, it's the trauma to the community, their family, their little circle and world as they know it. And so that can be very difficult to see as well. And it's very disheartening. It's really sad. You'll have, for example, a child that gets sexually assaulted, and then mom and dad never feel safe again around strangers, or never feel like it wasn't their fault. I've seen parents fully, feel responsible for what's happened, and that's really, really sad because sometimes they weren't really as responsible as they believe they were. It's not their fault, and so that's one thing I see is just the trauma victims who moving forward after the incident, and even again witnesses, their family, their outer community, they feel differently moving forward in life. They don't have the same trust in relationships. They may not behave the same when they go places or do things. And I think that's really quite disheartening, like I said. The second commonality, though, is on a brighter note, and that's seeing victims feel courage. And so there are moments where victims and even witnesses feel so helpless in certain situations. And then when they testify, and then when justice happens for them, they feel a sense of courage and almost like a ability or power back sort of situation. They've taken their power back. Now they can actually look at someone in the eye and say, you did this and this was wrong. So in that way, I do think that we see this commonality, and I think it's great to see. I like to tell my victims and witnesses that yes, while testifying or talking about something so awful can be really difficult, it can also bring a sense of closure, a sense of power. And I always tell them that I think they're the bravest people that I know, because they're doing something that's very difficult. And usually they do it very gracefully. And it's nice to see that at the end, they do feel better about what they did. And there's a level of power back.
That is very interesting. I have a pretty nasty hostile work environment, sexual harassment, sexual discrimination case that I'm working on right now. And without getting into too much detail, I was speaking with my client and we were going over discovery responses. And this individual was answering my questions and crying at the same time. And of course, it's my job to get this information. You try to be as delicate as you can, but it was tough. This individual doesn't know this, but they're kind of my hero.
Oh,
That they could power through
yeah.
me asking these questions, crying as they're answering, but answering nonetheless. And it's such a thing you see sometimes. It makes you reflect on your own life. It makes you reflect on what you complained about today, maybe. So I wanted to end on maybe somewhat of a positive note. We've discussed the difficulties in your job and how it can be hard. What's the best part of your job?
That part. Even, just last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, I had a really brave young woman, and, who was able to open up in a courtroom about something that happened to her. And I remember, just her face and her demeanor on the stand was just like, oh, this is not something I want to be here for. I don't want to talk about it. I'm over it. I'm done. But at the end of the day, it was done and she did great. And, I got a big hug out of it, even though it was COVID. Yes. I still hug my victims. They still hug me. I still have their numbers on my phone. So even when a case is completed, or we've done like the bulky hard work on it, and now just a matter of whether or not the person's going to take an offer or whatever, we still keep a relationship. And it's really great. We were talking about her favorite TV show, and I actually said to her, I was like, go to law school one day. You are one heck of an advocate, because she was able to advocate for herself. And so if you can advocate for yourself, then likely you can advocate for others. So I do think that that's the most rewarding part, is when we have witnesses and victims who genuinely are thankful and thank us for what we do. And they're like, thank goodness for you being here. Now I feel a little bit better sleeping at night, knowing that that person may not be able to harm me again.
Oh, that's great to hear. That is wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
Sunita, you've been very kind with your time. I appreciate it. It's a Friday afternoon. There's better things to do than talking
Yeah.
to a lawyer, I'm sure. What I like to do at the end of the podcast is just offer the guest, if there's any message that you have for people, anything you want to say open-ended, Go for it.
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. It's really lovely to know that, there are individuals out there who take an interest in various things, such as what we do at the DA's office. And I think everything I've said has just been based on my experience. And I really do think that the work we do is for the purpose of the greater good. And I hope that if someone out there has an opportunity to meet or get to know or talk to a prosecutor, that they do that and really try to determine on their own what kind of individual they're dealing with and their level of integrity and dignity and public service that they're trying to emit out into the world.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Sunita, thank you for being on.
Thank you. Good seeing you. Thank you.
My pleasure.